You can't discuss the Odyssey without discussing the Trojan War, which started when Aphrodite promised Paris the most beautiful woman in all the world in return for Paris choosing her as the fairest of all the goddesses. Unfortunately, the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, was already married to King Menelaus of Sparta. Despite her marriage, Paris goes to her home, kidnaps Helen, and takes her to Troy with him. When Menelaus demanded that Helen be returned, Paris refused. Menelaus then convinced Agamemnon to go to war with Troy, thus beginning the Trojan War. The battle raged for 9 years. The Trojans were led by Paris and the Greeks by Agamemnon. Eventually, the Trojans retreated back into their fortress with impenetrable walls. This is the part of the story that most people know, where the Greeks realized that they were not going to be able to fight their way in, so they made this elaborate and appealing horse that was hollow. Inside the horse, they hid several of their greatest warriors. Once their plan was set, the remaining Greeks boarded their ships and sailed away. The Trojans, believing that they had been victorious, brought the horse into the city as a spoil of war. That night, the Greeks sprang out from the horse, killed a bunch of guards, opened the gates to the city of Troy, and in marched the rest of the Greek army, ending the war. While Homer's epics seem very complicated at times, when we look at what makes up the language of the epics, we can break it down and make it much easier to understand and to get through. Throughout both the Odyssey and the Iliad, Homer is famous for using comparisons. One device he is famous for is the use of similes to compare two unrelated topics, using like or as, and by doing so, emphasizing a point he is trying to make. We can see this in the Iliad, when Homer describes they, the soldiers, swarm like bees. He compares the soldiers to bees, two things that are not similar, to emphasize the soldiers' actions. Like everything Homer writes, the similes he uses are epic as seen by the intense descriptions he uses. As you look at the picture of the two examples, look over the yellow section to see the massive detail Homer goes into to make his similes. Detail is another device that is common in Homer's work. When reading, this can be a helpful reminder as sometimes it can be easy to get lost in all that description. Homer is trying to create a picture, and an epic one at that, so while the detail may seem like a lot, it is a device he uses to help the reader imagine what he's trying to say. Now that the Trojan War is ended, Odysseus sets off for Ithaca and is immediately driven off course by storms sent by Poseidon. He lands on an island where two of his men get stoned and decide not to return home, while everyone else is captured by a Cyclops who eats some of the crew. In their escape, Odysseus blinds the Cyclops, Polyphemus, and takes credit for it, shame that Polyphemus is the son of Poseidon, which only makes the sea god even angrier at Odysseus, who he curses to wander the seas for 10 more years. The voyage continues, and Odysseus and his men visit the isle of the goddess Circe, who decides to turn half the crew into pigs because reasons. Odysseus is immune to her magic because the god Hermes had him eat plants that would protect him. After confronting Circe about being a jerk, she agrees to release his men in exchange for Odysseus' love. 1 year later, Odysseus and his men leave the island, but not until one of them has died from the usual thing, getting drunk and falling off of something high. This will be important later. Odysseus decides that he wants to talk to the ghost of Tiresias about how to get Poseidon off his back, so he sails to the end of the world and enter the underworld. The first person he talks to there is the dead crewman who says, "Jerk! I died, and nobody buried me! Do something!" Odysseus then also talks to Tiresias, who says there's not much anyone can do about the pissed-off sea god, but he does have some other good advice. So Odysseus then returns to Circe to figure out the remainder of their journey. Odysseus decides the only course of action is to take his ship near the most insanely dangerous things that he could on the way back to Ithaca. They go past the Sirens, whose song drives men mad, and Scylla, the six-headed sea serpent, as well as Charybdis, the whirlpool of death. Naturally, things go spectacularly, and 6 crewmen are eaten by Scylla, and they barely escape Charybdis with their lives. Once past these horrors, Odysseus and his men land on another island to gather food and water. While there, the crew gets another winning idea, and they kill some of the sacred cattle of the sun god Helios. For this sacrilege, Helios demands that Zeus punishes them. Now, with the two gods officially pissed at him, Odysseus sets sail once again, and you'll never guess what happens. You're right, a shipwreck! Except this time, everyone but Odysseus dies. He washes ashore on the island of Aegea, where the nymph Calypso uses her magic to make him stay there as her lover. 7 years later! Athena finally talks Zeus into letting Odysseus go. Hey, she's a war goddess, not a debater, and Hermes is sent to demand Odysseus' release. Odysseus then finds his way to the Phaeacians, who are impressed with his story, and who wouldn't be, and help him finally return to Ithaca, where he disguises himself just to be safe, finds a lay of the land, and then kills the ever-living heck out of the guys who are trying to marry his wife, kill his son, and steal his kingdom in the 20 years he's been missing. The Lotus Eaters were a race of people living on an island dominated by the lotus plant. The lotus plant had a narcotic effect, and anyone who ate it fell into a sleep-like state. Cyclopses were giants with one eye in the center of the foreheads. Odysseus encountered the Cyclops Polyphemus, and escaped him by stabbing him in the eye. Poseidon was the brother of Zeus, and god of the sea. He was a drama queen, like all Olympians, and had a beef with Odysseus because Odysseus didn't give him credit at the defeat of Troy, and because Odysseus gouged out his son's eye. Circe was a goddess of magic. She was renowned for her knowledge of potions and herbs, and with her staff and potions she could transform her enemies into animals. Sirens were dangerous creatures who drew in sailors with their beautiful voices and music, causing them to shipwreck. Charybdis was a sea monster that swallowed ships, and it lived opposite Scylla in a strait. Odysseus encountered Charybdis twice. The first time he avoided it, the second time he didn't. Scylla was a six-headed sea monster that was opposite of Charybdis in a strait. Odysseus chose to risk death by passing by Scylla because it meant only losing 6 sailors instead of his entire ship. Calypso was a nymph that lived off the island of Ogygia, daughter of the Titan Atlas. Her name means to hide, conceal, or deceive.